I put this one up simply because another class asked me this question. We didn't talk about business process re-engineering, and it is a fundamental issue with what we do as operations managers in a strategic sense. When we talk about changes, we can talk about incremental changes or we can talk about radical changes. Within a 4-week forum such as this, it's pretty difficult to cover everything in so much detail. So we're using a philosophical case here. I teach enterprise information systems and enterprise resource planning as a full topic. So I go on week after week talking about this. So I just open up with this particular slide. Is that glass half full or half empty? You know the concept when we see half full or half empty? We need to look at it in a completely different way. It's neither. It's the wrong size of glass. Or should it be glass? Or should there be liquid in it? In a philosophical way, that's what re-engineering is about. It is not just about taking what you have got and making decisions on what you've got, but questioning the very nature of what you have got and where you're going with it. So it's neither half full nor half empty, which is the traditional way. It is all about, is it the glass? You know, should we be having a glass there? Should we be having liquid in the glass? It's that fundamental difference with how we look at processes. And I hope that's not too deep for 8:30 on a Friday morning. In this first topic, we have 3 topics today. After this topic, I'm going to be talking in general terms about the homework and the assessments. Or should I? No, I'm going to talk about it now. I did talk about the homework. It's not designed to be really some philosophies that actually comes out of this. And the 2 learning objectives is to get you to understand that regardless of how sophisticated your quantitative analysis could be or is, then things could change. Like the lithium-ion batteries in the 787. And by the way, it's not just Boeing that is going to be affected by the lithium-ion batteries in the 787 Dreamliner. Airbus is going to be affected as well, are they not? So what we have to do is we have to consider whether or not, yes, there is a risk of our demand going down if something happens, but then we also have to consider the effect if our competitor's product fails. Look at it from the Airbus perspective and say, well, okay, if we have planned to do so much production, if we have capacity to do so much production, what if suddenly we get a big upsurge in demand? Now, okay, we all know why July's production of Vimto may be different. There's other reasons. But look at it from another perspective. Look at it, and I call this the positive side of uncertainty, not the negative side of uncertainty. We all look at risk and we say, well, okay, what's going to push our demand down? But we don't think about our opposition and what could push our demand up. And I would suggest to you that because Boeing have got in trouble with their plane, there's still the same amount of planes that are going to be required in the future. So Airbus may well benefit. Airbus, however, must be in a position to take advantage of that positive side of uncertainty. Because if they can't, if they're already maxed out with the capacity because they've been too rigid in their plans, the lucky break is going to go by them. they're not going to be able to take advantage of that lucky break. It's not a lucky break for Boeing, but it's a lucky break for Airbus, your competitor. If your competitor stumbles, it's not a lucky break for them, but it could be a lucky break for you. But what you then have to do is to consider, can I take advantage of somebody else's misfortune? I mean, you're not setting out to set them up for misfortune, but if it occurs, how can you benefit from it? So you have to have some capacity in there to take advantage of that. That's really the idea behind the third part of question 1, which, by the way, is also going to be in the exam, a different version of it. Different figures, that's all. Little's Law is a practical example of how somebody would set a parameter for how much service quality you should get. If it's 20 minutes to go through the scanner, would passengers be happy about that? Next week, we only have 2 topics, and for the last hour, we're talking specifically about the assessment items. Also, last week, you would have received an email saying that the assignment has been modified. You can do either, the first one or the second one. This was an operational blunder on our part. I sent in a question, but only half the question was actually put onto what got to you. My questions and my specific questions, but the background from something else entirely. So there were people that said, well, we've already started doing about our own company. So Chifley came back and said, yes, okay, well, you can do either. So it's a choice. And I won't try and persuade you to do either. But what the assignment is about is the application of everything that you've learned out of these courses, including next week. I chose the nuclear power station not because it's modern or topical or whatever. It's just that everybody then has the same base to work on. And these types of assignments need to be done, or this one in particular, by looking at your case notes, by looking at all your lectures, and saying, how can I apply that to this scenario? The scenario of the nuclear power station. I don't want people writing about how to build a nuclear power reactor or whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not really into this. I'm really interested in how you would apply all of the theories that you have learned within this course into one particular application. Now, once it goes outside of that and say, well, okay, here's one for the Dubai airport. Here's one for your company. Domestic appliances. Each has a different scenario. So it would be more difficult to do it if we all chose different companies, which we all have to. We don't all work for the airport. So, but the choice is yours. You can do your own, and you can find out which actually fits within your own organization or the nuclear reactor. And I have no preference. This is Chifley's call that you can do either one. So, and we'll be talking about how to do that next week as well. But be careful. There's a general thing, and I'm sure that I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. I mark a lot of assignments, I have to say. And I'm thinking about getting this rubber stamp. Because I'm fed up with writing. Answer the question as set. Answer the question as set. I might as well get a rubber stamp and go ching, 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 ching. Because generally, both undergraduate students and postgraduate students still don't answer the questions that are set for them. They say, oh, we'll set our own question for this particular one. Now, if your bosses say to you, do an assignment and I want A, B, and C, and you give them D, E, and F, can you see there's a little bit of conflict here? That is not actually what's required. If somebody says to you, I want A, B, and C, then give them A, B, and C if at all possible. There are certain circumstances where you have to go back and renegotiate, but if it's impossible to do A, B, and C. But A, B, and C is possible in this particular case, and that's how you would do it. You would do it by looking at the notes and saying, okay, this is a postgraduate course. We know that it's not just about learning stuff. It's about applying stuff. It's about understanding the concepts and then being able to apply those concepts. And that's really all it's about. So it's about applying it in the right scenario. So we are really talking about the application of what you've already learned to a particular set of circumstances. And I hope you understand that. So please do A, B, and C. And look at the questions very carefully. And if you see a big rubber stamp on there, you'll know that I finally found somebody to make it. So, three topics today. Location and layout. We'll consider the important operations management decisions of where to locate a new facility and how the facility should be laid out for maximum efficiency. We'll consider the factors that affect location choices for manufacturing and for service. And then describe and consider 4 basic facility layout types. Finally got it. So determining the appropriate location for new facilities such as plants, or warehouses, or retail stores, or hospitals, or restaurants is a critical task for operations managers. Remember in week 1, we talked about 3 types of strategy that all have to be linked before our operations strategy will actually make sense. We have our organizational strategy. We have to know in a broad sense where we're going to go. Then we need to think about business strategy of how we're going to deliver that organizational strategy, and the operations strategy comes at the end. Everything must be in sync for that to work efficiently. We want to work smart. We don't want to work hard. We don't want to be against each of our strategies at any time. So, if we have chosen the wrong location to start with, then we're always going to be at a disadvantage. We're always going to try to be catching up. We should not try to make our lives more difficult than they are. Operations management is a difficult task at any rate. We don't want to make more difficulties for ourselves by making the wrong sorts of choices. So these types of location decisions are really quite important. Whilst in many cases decisions about location are made directly relating to bottom line criteria, such as it's low cost or low labor cost or low taxes, it's not always the most important factors. I have to say now that I am somewhat amazed for 5 years of wondering why there is not more manufacturing facilities here. Because I keep going through the economic factors and the non-economic factors, and I say, well, we've got all this in the UAE. Why shouldn't more people come here? That's a question I can't answer. But maybe it should be a question for future operations management classes about why. Why don't people come here? What's the reason why you don't have big manufacturing plants in this country? Why don't you have more of them? We'll go through the different scenarios in a minute, and you can see that it's all here. So it's a question that I have, and I really can't answer that. So the factors affecting the location decisions, it involves 4 decisions based on both economic and non-economic factors. But first, we need to decide which country. This is the international decision. The regional decision, which region within that country do we go? The community decision, which city or community within that region? And the site selection, which location within that community. Each of them will have a different scenario. When I set up my business as my repackaging business, I had to look at the decisions of where was my labor likely to come from. Now, I know that this was a high degree of manual labor, of people with, they were really laborers. This is in Australia. So where was my base of labor? So I needed to go to an area, not an upmarket area in Brisbane, where people, all had degrees, and there were a different type of people, a different type of worker. I needed a certain type of people to work in this particular factory because it was labor intensive. So I chose a location based on, okay, how far did we have to deliver the goods at the end of the day? But essentially because it was labor intensive, where my source of labor would come from. Because I didn't want people having to travel large distances. I would rather take the end result, the end product, and deliver all of that. The labor decision was far more, or the labor factor was far more important than the product factor in this particular case. We had an ideal location, that it was at the end of a freeway, just off the freeway, so it was good access into our delivery points, but it was basically based on where the labor-centric area was. So this site selection was very, very important. If we had located, I sold this business, by the way. I sold this business as an ongoing business. It lasted 6 months before it folded. It was a perfectly successful business, and I made a lot of money on it. And you always make a lot of money when you buy it when you create it from nothing and you sell it for something. You know, that's the best way of actually creating a business, is it not? You can buy a business and then sell it, or you can create a business with nothing and then you sell it for something. It was just an idea. So, you took that idea and you transformed. And this is what operations management is about from week 1, transforming inputs into outputs. So that transformation process was great. But the new owner decided we want to be closer. What is that? Huh? Okay. The new owner decided that he didn't want to move all of this way. It was a long way from where he lived. So he made a really bad strategic decision. For himself, the new manager of the operation said, "This is too far for me to go to work. I'm going to move it closer to my home." And I scratched my head and I said, why would he do that? Because where he moved to was a high socioeconomic area. It had no labor. His existing trained labor force all said, nah, we don't want to travel that far. And it was talking about 45, 50 kilometers away from where they had to go. So 40 or 50 kilometers each way per day for your labor force. Your labor force are going to say, probably not. And that's what they did. So within 3 months, he'd lost his trained labor force. He couldn't find another sustainable labor force where he was. And it was either 6 months or 12 months that he bought this business from me. I'd spent the money, so I couldn't give it back to him. So, and it was gone. Simply on making poor decisions on where you're actually going to locate your facility.
Don't you think raw material availability of
Sure.
raw material is an element here?
Yes. In this particular example, there's always a balance. You know, you would love to be able to have it right next door to your major suppliers and your major customers. It would be lovely if you could actually have that. But there's got to be a balancing trick. If that's not where, if the cost of land, the cost of factories, of renting a factory is very high there, then you have to say, well, okay, what is the cost of transportation into this? We'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. But there's always trade-offs. There's always trade-offs in these decisions. What was never a good trade-off decision was the decision by this new manager to say, I want to be closer to my work, so I'll move the work closer to my house. That's not a good management decision at all. So it just didn't fit. So some of the economic factors affecting location choice include the facility cost. That is the construction, including the cost of land, the utilities, the water, the power, and the taxes, and the maintenance on those particular issues. How much to maintain? The operating cost, the production materials, the direct labor, and the admin personnel. Now, we're not just talking about an area here, we're talking about an international zone area. And then we're talking about transportation cost, moving the goods from their origins to their final destinations. All of them is going to attract some costs. And we have to put some sort of a formula in place to say which one has got more weighting on the other, which we're going to optimize our final choice. It's always going to be an optimization. In the US, Detroit used to be the place for building motor vehicles. But now it's along a strip of roads fairly close to that area, but it's not quite inner city. Inner city used to be the way to have your production because your labor force was in inner city. But as the production changed, the production methods changed, there was no need to go in a city where your labor is, because you're not using labor as much. For that type of production, you're using robots. And you're getting more specialized people that actually come in. So at one stage, when your production methods were essentially manual inputs from people, then it made sense to choose your location in a city. But it doesn't make much sense when your labor is being replaced by robots, when your labor force is actually being reduced enormously and you're getting a different type of person. You've still got your middle management, but very few of the actual workers, and they're more skilled workers, not your factory workers. So things change. Things change over time. And you must be appreciative of how these things change over time. You know, understand that, yes, that was the right decision, last decade, but now it's not the same parameters.
Another classic example would be the Dubai World Central Airport, which is built in Jebel Ali.
Yes?
So see the difference between two locations, one in the main city and one far away, and that just to meet the demand of the aircraft and the growth of passenger growth and traffic and cargo to be able to, as they say, to utilize the capacity ahead of demand.
That's a really, really good example. If you didn't hear it, it is about Dubai Airport. When Dubai, 30 years ago, was basically a small fishing village, was 30 years ago? 40 years ago. 50 years ago, it made sense to have the airport where it is now. Did it not? If you're going to think about a location in this sense, where you're going to have it, well, you want it close to the city. But does it make sense to have the airport there right now? If you think about it, I know it's there. I know everybody knows where Dubai Airport is. But it really doesn't make sense to have it where it is at the moment. That land is very valuable for other things. So what is happening now?
Actually, we starting the cargo operation started long ago. However, the passenger traffic, the general aviation, by October 27th this year, 2013, because according to the strategic plan of 2020, is to move most of the operation there, because we expecting to have around 90 million passengers moving through Dubai Airport.
Yeah.
To be able to utilize the facilities well and be able to provide the services for the
Sure.
airlines, for passengers, for cargos, and
Yeah. Does everybody know that the airport is moving? Sorry, Jebel Ali, yes. Well, ask Fukushima plant about location. A nuclear power plant in a city? I'm sorry, I missed that. Why would you have a nuclear power plant in a city? I don't think the nuclear power plant is going to be in a city, and I think that would be an horrific scenario. That's about question 3, by the way, about where would you want your nuclear waste? Yeah, yeah. You know, things may change. Things may change in the future, and we live in a dynamic environment. But of course, the nuclear power location is of course going to be a part of what you need to talk about. But that's a really great example, and I should have thought of that before. So thanks for reminding me of that particular one. Dubai Airport, one of the most successful airports in the world now, yet, and you would think that this would be the least likely to change because it's the head of the pack. But yes, we're changing it. We're moving.
airlines are really reluctant to move.
Yeah.
Because what happened is most of the revenue generation from the aviation industry comes from the transiting passengers.
Yes.
20% movement is transit. However, the rest are joining passengers.
Yeah.
But Dubai airports are really working hard to give competitive rates for the airlines, for the stands, for the all the other services, parkings, and the landing permits and all that.
If I thought about it, instead of the nuclear power reactor, we could have had Jebel Ali Airport, because that fits in very nicely as well to all of the things we're talking about in operations management. It's really a very good example of a strategy, and it's a very good example of saying, well, regardless of how well we think we're doing something, we know we can do it better. I mean, this is a fundamental in quality assurance. And somebody is thinking ahead. Somebody is thinking ahead and saying, well, okay, this is unsustainable by having, just building additional terminals on it, even though it's big 380 terminals. And now, of course, Qantas are there. 4 days ago, they started arriving in Dubai with alliances. So, yeah, this is going to change things quite remarkably but freight's already there, because it doesn't really matter where the freight goes. But the passengers, that was a slightly different story. Less reluctant to, or more reluctant to actually move the passengers around. But yes, as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, it's going to be more and more difficult. If you also want to look at another scenario, look at London. Heathrow, even with the addition of, is it Terminal 5 that British Airways use? Yeah, Terminal 5. Even with that, you're going to be really fit to get off a plane in Heathrow because you're walking for about 2 kilometers sometimes with your bags. Am I right? People go through Heathrow. You think, my goodness gracious, I'll wait for a bus. But you're going up and around and down. And there's very few moving escalators as you've got in Dubai. It's not I'm not a great fan of Heathrow, as you can imagine. But for many years now, there's been talk of this additional airport in the Thames. And what's the mayor of London called? Boris. Boris, the mayor of London, I've forgotten his second name, has been pushing for this additional airport in the Thames district because you don't really need it that close to town. Heathrow at one stage was in the suburbs. It's far enough out. But now it's really part of London. So it's very difficult. Now you've got Gatwick and you've got Stansted at the north. So you've got these airports that are sort of filling in the gaps in some way. But you still got these big decisions which the British can't seem to get their head around about having to make the decision to have another airport in London. Desperately required. Heathrow is at capacity. Even with bringing in Terminal 5s with British Airways, it is just about at capacity. And it shows, and people know that. And when you see the difference between going through Dubai Airport and going through Heathrow Airport, you can see the operations management efficiencies and the inefficiencies within Britain. But that's not something that the British operations managers can do something about because they haven't got the facilities to actually move. There are politicians or I don't know who's not making the decision to move to another airport. But so you are limited, and that's why I go back to having this organizational strategy, business strategy, and operation strategy. If you haven't got those things that are aligned, it's pretty difficult. But in Dubai, that example of the new airport is one of those examples of how you can align that strategy. You can look at an operation sense and saying, well, okay, we're running out of space here. It's getting tighter and tighter to give service, although you still get great service in Dubai, but it's getting tighter and tighter. We think in the future, if you are going to increase your passenger rate that much, you have to be rethinking about where your airport is going to be. 20 years ago, it was a great decision to put the airport there, but to have the airport there. But we're not 20 years ago. We're now. We have to be thinking not just about now, but in another 20 years' time. Airports just aren't going to be built overnight. They take a fair amount of time and infrastructure to actually set up. So thank you for that example. But it's always a balance. But the ability to change is what's important. The flexibility to allow your organization to make those changes when it's required. There's some non-economic factors involved. It is simply the availability of labor, the transportation services and utilities. Then we're talking about climate, community, environment, and quality of life. The third one that was in the book was state and local politics, which is really from an Australian perspective. And that does actually count in Australia. Virgin Blue, which is Richard Branson's version of an airline in Australia, which competes with Qantas domestically, and does a very good job of competing with it. Moved to Queensland. It moved to Queensland because the facilities up there were cheaper. This is a brand new organization. They moved all of the training facilities to Brisbane. We don't know exactly how much was involved, but we know that the state government actually bid for Virgin Blue to be in Brisbane rather than in Sydney or Melbourne, which is where Qantas is based. Qantas is based in Sydney, jet base. But they wanted to move it out. They were able to have much more space, much more freedom of movement by moving your airline to the capital of Queensland rather than the capital of New South Wales. So it was a great decision, we believe, by Branson and Virgin Blue to move to Queensland in that case. Not just because of the climate or the community environment. Much better, I'd say this because I'm from Queensland, but it's a much better living environment in Queensland than it is in Sydney. Although, having said that, Sydney is a very beautiful city to visit. I recommend you do it. Either Emirates or Qantas will get you there, by the way. So all of these things come into play. And they're really non-economic factors. I go back now to my original point, when you've seen the economic factors and the non-economic factors, of why haven't we got more in this country? It's all there. For 8 months of the year, this is just about the perfect climate. Is it not? There's community environment here. There is certainly quality of life here. If you want to, and I guess that, there's people all around the world that are trying to get here, trying to get branches here. So why don't they move their head offices here? We get branches. We don't get the head offices as much as we should. We've got labor. We've got transportation services in droves, and we've got great utilities. The roads, the ports, the airports, the seaports and the airports are top class anywhere in the world. They are world-class facilities. It's all here. The roads are just about the best that I've driven on anywhere in the world. I could do with a few more corners, but that's me. It's all here. I just can't understand why we're not attracting more people to come here. Location as well. If you think about location being on the Silk Route, it's called now, from Asia to both Africa and Europe, this is the ideal location for it. And there is competition. Where do you think the competition is going to come from? Everybody wants this marketplace. Everybody wants to be a Dubai. Everybody wants to be in this particular region. So where is our main opposition going to come from? Yes, but what cities would be vying for the role that Dubai could actually offer? Singapore, well, yes, Singapore, but it's pretty close to Asia. Again, it's location when we talk about China. China is your manufacturing base, and yes, it's getting its own domestic consumption, but it's mainly about export, so it needs to put it somewhere. That's one part of the Silk Route, which is China. But well, there are others. Doha is certainly taking nibbles out of, and they're trying very desperately to get in. Where? I'm not too sure about Saudi Arabia. There are some factors in Saudi Arabia which people will not want to go there. There are some factors in Egypt right at the moment, but Egypt would have been a great spot. But you've got Cairo. You ever driven in Cairo? I mean, the infrastructure. Where? Beirut before, but it's still unstable. You still wouldn't set your businesses up in some place that it's still got shelled buildings on the seafront. And regardless of how long ago it happened, while those shell buildings are there and you walk down the Corniche and you see the buildings, you say, oh, wow, I remember. Yeah, I think you're right, but I'm actually thinking more along Istanbul's lines. You don't think so? Why? Watch this space. Watch this space. They're trying to set themselves up as this gateway between Europe and Asia. And you know that the bridge that goes across is, in fact, that gateway between Europe and Asia. Turkish Airlines are making big moves to actually get that infrastructure in. If you think about what Turkish Airlines are actually doing at the moment, they're setting itself up pretty well. They've got a good location from between Europe and Asia. But I think there's going to be some players. Who said Azerbaijan? Who said that? Azerbaijan. Did you say Azerbaijan? That area. Let me just give you an example, an Australian example here. If I had a whiteboard, I'd actually draw something, but do you know much about the geography of Australia? It's a big island. We'll call it a big ball. Sorry? Big island, yeah, island continent. Over the eastern side is where most of the people are. Queensland up the top, and at the bottom of Queensland you've got Brisbane, which is a city. About 1,000 kilometres south, you've got Sydney in New South Wales. Around the corner, you've got Melbourne. And a little bit further over, you've got Adelaide in South Australia. So those are the capital cities of Australia. You have a very poor infrastructure in railways, which, by the way, is the one thing that I don't think that UAE has, but I think we're getting there. The very poor structure because the British, when they went there initially, all set up their railways with different size lines in each state, which is a very bad strategic decision. So you couldn't have your rolling stock, your trains and your trucks, you couldn't have them running from one state to another because the line sizes were different. So you've had that legacy, but that is changing. So road transport is very, very popular within Australia. Trams in Melbourne, yes. Yes. Actually, we talk about that when we talk about General Motors, but in Australia, if you have a transport system which moves from mainly the capital cities, forget about Perth, that's the most distant capital city in the world from anywhere else, from another capital city, Perth. It's a long way from everywhere. Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide are your markets. And what you're really doing is you're transferring freight between those. So where are you going to have your transport hub? This is an operations management decision. Where are you going to have your hub for transport, which is where the trucks come in and they maybe swap drivers or swap trailers or swap prime movers. Where are you going to have it? And remember, you've got to go Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide. Where are you going to have it? Sydney? Sydney? Think outside the box. Right in the middle. Right in the middle. Wangaratta. Nobody's ever heard of Wangaratta. Why have it in a city? If you think about these locations, why? Because, our transport